want to welcome you to our program today. We have a very special guest with us. Her name is Lindsay Geyer, and she is the Spiritual and Grief Counselor for Home Health United in Platteville, Wisconsin. And so, Lindsay, thank you so much for being on our program today, being our guest.
Absolutely.
And so we're just so excited. Home Health United, I know that covers a lot of services. I mean, they provide a lot of services. And so just what are all some of the services that Home Health United provides for people?
Sure. So Home Health United provides hospice services, which is where I come in as the spiritual and grief counselor. They provide home care, they provide palliative care, medical equipment, infusion pharmacies, and then services throughout the community.
Wow, that's a lot, and that's so important. It seems like more and more, as people age or as people have different needs, and just always wondering what kind of services are out there. And I'm just so thankful that we're living in this day and age that we have organizations like Home Health United and those services that really minister to people and provide services depending upon what the needs are. It seems like in-home health care and hospice care and palliative care. But you work most specifically, though, with the hospice program then, don't you?
Correct.
And the grief care.
Yep.
Yeah, so spiritual director. So what are your duties then as far as being the spiritual director?
Sure. So what I do is I provide emotional and spiritual support to patients and their families at the end of life. So that means visiting with patients and their families, actively listening to them, connecting them with their clergy in the area, and also providing bereavement support. So after someone dies, we follow the family up to 13 months, and also do grief groups, and then we also have Camp Glow.
Okay. So as we think about just hospice, I think maybe a lot of people know what hospice is, or maybe we hear of hospice and we kind of come to some kind of a conclusion as to what it is, but it really isn't that, hospice, or so I don't know, hospice. How would you define hospice? For people today that are wondering, what are hospice services, and just what exactly is that?
Sure. So I'll get kind of technical here with you. So hospice is a Medicare benefit. It's for someone who is terminally ill. So a doctor states that someone, if the disease runs its natural course, they have about 6 months or less to live. It's for someone who no longer wants to seek aggressive treatments. They just want to be comfortable in all sorts of aspects, be that spiritually, emotionally, mentally, and that.
Yeah, so it's caring for a patient at the end of their life, 6 months or less is kind of the rule of thumb there. And it's not just taking care of the patient, but also it sounds like it's also the care of the whole family and everybody involved then.
Absolutely, absolutely. So the nurses specifically deal with the patient and their comfort, but a lot of times, like myself as the chaplain or our social worker might step in to help the family emotionally.
Yeah, so hospice, it's kind of like a team of experts or, of people who, professionals who are actually coming together. Like you mentioned, social worker, a doctor, nurse. Are there others that also are part of that team then?
Absolutely. We also have volunteers. That's one thing that's really special about hospice. Volunteers can come and sit with someone, give the family members a respite if they need to take a break. They can make blankets, they can do clerical work, they do all sorts of things to help us out.
So the volunteers are really a key component for the hospice organization then.
Absolutely.
And so here again, if people are looking for a way that they can serve and minister to people, especially in such a critical time, that to serve as a volunteer for a hospice organization such as Home Health United is so very important. And so, and then you had already mentioned that your involvement is working with them as far as the emotions, their spiritual. What are some of this? Well, here again, this is probably a pretty broad question, but as far as working with patients, in the last stage of their life and with the families, are there certain issues that you find to be more common than others? I mean, what are some of the concerns that a patient has during those times, as far as their spiritual needs go, or is it pretty broad?
Well, it is broad depending on the person, but Home Health United recognizes that spirituality is a huge component of end-of-life care. So at the end of life, sometimes people try to connect with their spirituality a bit more. So maybe if they hadn't gone to church in a while or gone to the synagogue in a while, they want to reconnect with their religion. So a lot of times I will step in, see where they're at, see if that's important to them, and then reconnect them with their clergy.
Yeah, so that's a very, very important thing, because I hear so many times that what so key is that people want to be able to die in peace, and to die in peace, in relationship with God, but then also just being at peace with everybody else, family and friends, and
Yep.
is that part of it too? Trying to help people
Absolutely.
working through maybe if they've
Absolutely.
had a grudge or a difference over their life, making sure that they come to some kind of a reconciliation there at the end.
Forgiveness is huge. Helping families find closure, letting them know that if there are things they want to say, this would probably be the time to do it. One thing we often tell our families when someone is at the end of life and they're still not responding, we tell the families that they can still talk to them and that the loved ones can still hear them, because we believe that hearing is the last thing to go. Mm-hmm. So if there are things that they need to say, we just encourage that.
Very important too. Whether it's to say that one last "I love you" or "I'm sorry that," or whatever it may be, to feel like you have kind of come to some kind of a closure, I would think.
Absolutely.
Okay, well then another thing is, as far as the care for the patient and their families, is that you also have quite, bereavement care then.
Yes.
And so how long? Yeah, so let's just talk about that a little bit as far as grief care. Like if we break a bone, generally the doctor will say what? It takes 6 weeks for that to heal. And we'd like to say that with grief, but that's not the case. It's not like we've got a rule of thumb like it takes X amount of time and then, hey, everything is going to be okay. Then
Exactly.
So grief, how would you describe grief and just the importance of grieving? And
Sure. So anything we say about grief will really have to be generalized, because everyone grieves a little differently. There's no certain set way to grieve, like you were saying. So everyone needs to be able to express their feelings openly and be able to talk to someone they trust, be that family or be that a clergy member or a good friend, someone that they can really talk to. Doing grief care is so important, doing grief work so that someone can move on with their life and not be stuck.
And so, a lot of times when we hear about grief, that we hear that there's kind of like stages that we go through. And so it's not like, sometimes you almost kind of envision, well, okay, we're at this stage, and now after 3 or 4 months, now we're in this stage. It's not quite that clear cut and dried, though, is it?
No, and I get that a lot. I get people asking, well, I've been kind of depressed and I've been angry, so next I need to be bargaining, or, now I can accept this, right? Because that's the way this goes. The stages of grief, the denial, the anger, the depression, bargaining, and acceptance, those can all fluctuate. They can come and go at different stages. You may think that you're okay and ready to go, and then boom, you could be in the grocery store and something reminds you of your loved one, and that could set you back a little bit.
Yeah, so you have these different stages. So if people are saying, well, why am I so angry? Or why am I feeling depressed? Or why am I always bargaining? That's that people should be assured that this is just kind of, well, that's normal for the grief process.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah, and one of the things that people can oftentimes do is they try to say, well, it's best just to try to, if we can just skip around grief. A lot of times people think, well, you're strong if you're not grieving. But so the benefit of grieving would be, like, what would you say to people to say, well, if I can just hurdle over grief and I can really show everybody that I'm just fine, what are some of the pitfalls of people that don't grieve? Then What ends up happening if you don't grieve properly?
Sure. So if someone's not grieving properly, or they're staying busy all the time and not giving themselves a chance to grieve, it could come back and bite them. So the next time someone dies, the grief that they're feeling then is going to be impacted multiply. It'll multiply because of the grief they didn't grieve before.
Okay. Yeah, and so we really need to encourage people to grieve then.
Absolutely.
And to grieve and to go through all these different stages. But here again, is it good to be a lone ranger in your grief, to say, well, I'm just going to go to my man cave and to grieve? I mean, do you see that there's maybe a difference between, women and men's grief, or it seems like we all grieve, but is it tougher for men to come and get support? I guess what I'm looking for is thinking about support. Some people
Sure.
say, well, I think I'm just going to do this on my own, and others say, well, no, it's a benefit if we can gather together and get a network of support going with other people.
So solitude's not a bad thing, but solitude over a sustained period of time is. So it's always good to have people in your life you can talk to about how you're feeling. If you need to take a break, if it gets too intense, absolutely you can be by yourself. And as far as the difference between the way men grieve and the way females grieve, what I'm finding is that, from the literature I read when I was studying this, it's always talking about how men are insular and they don't talk about their grief and they don't show their feelings. I sometimes see that, but there are men who are open to expressing their feelings, and I always appreciate it when they do.
Well, I think society kind of changes for, and I want to say the better, because I know for a lot of men, you kind of almost feel like you got to be this kind of John Wayne kind of an image, and even though you're hurting inside, and you still have all the emotions and the feel, that a woman would have, but because of society saying, well, you got to be, in a sense, this man, and so you're not allowed to grieve.
Right.
But maybe our society has been changing to say, for men, it's okay. You're still a man to grieve. As a matter of fact, it's a manly thing to grieve.
Yep, absolutely. I'm seeing a bit more of that.
So hopefully men are encouraged to come to the grief care class. And so that's what you offer, is grief support then?
I
And
do.
so explain the program a little bit.
So we offer, what I do is when someone on our services and our hospice services passes away, I follow their family for 13 months. That means that throughout 13 months, I will make phone calls to them, periodically checking in, seeing how they're doing, and offering visits. We have mailings that go out to them. And then I also provide a grief support group throughout the year. There's about 4 of them throughout the year, I believe. That's open to people that have been on our services, their family, but it's also open to the community.
Oh, okay, that's good to know. And so you offer 4 of them. So is it like a 1-session class, or?
So usually they go for 5 weeks.
Well, 5 weeks,
Yep.
okay.
And it's once a week for 5 weeks, and they last about 2 hours per session.
And what kinds of things do you generally in each one of these 5 sessions, and what is there some topic that's covered at each one then?
Well, each grief group is a different entity. So in one, it's for specifically spouse and partner loss. So we go over what it's like to lose a spouse. So everyone in the group will have lost a spouse or a partner. We talk about, new roles that someone may have to take on. Maybe someone lost a husband and he was the one who always paid the bills and did all the yard work, and what it's like to have that on your plate now. One of our sessions is called When Morning Dawns. It's a more generic support group, but it kind of goes through the seasons of grief, what it's like to grieve, and there's a video that goes along with it, and some readings.
Yeah, well, very good. One of the hard things, somebody's loss, it's always significant, and it's always very difficult. But when you think of like parents, when a child dies, that's always particularly hard. And I don't know what you would have to say, Lindsay, about this, but I've always kind of heard that that's kind of the grief that you never really ever get over. But I don't know what you would have to say about that. I mean, not to say that. What would you say to grieving parents? To say, is there any encouragement
That's a tough one. So a child loss is something that's very difficult, and I really haven't had a lot of experience with that. A lot of times I deal with, people who have serious illnesses who are maybe in their 40s to 50s, or sometimes some older folks who have some dementia. With children's loss, what I do as a counselor and as a chaplain, I'm there to listen to people. So a lot of times people like to share the stories of the one they lost, so I would be there to listen to them about that. Maybe they could do something in their child's honor, that sometimes people find healing.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's good. I mean, in your study of and working with grief, but I know, like, for instance, hospice, I suppose that you just don't have too many children who are like in a hospice program.
You don't.
But then there's also the situation where you might have a parent who dies, and you've got grieving children now. I would think that would be it's hard enough as adults to grieve the death of our parents or a spouse, but children, when their grandparents die, or when they have a parent who dies, I mean, that's got to be devastating, and for them to be able to try to process their grief, I would think that would be, quite a special ministry that would be. But you do have something that you offer for that, then, don't you?
We do. If you want, I can say a few words about children's grief, because it is so specialized, and it's not the same as adult grief. So the thing that is similar is that both children and adults need to express their grief and have someone they can talk with. Both need to know that the feelings that they're experiencing don't mean that they're going crazy. But some of the differences, children's grief will sometimes be intermittent. So there could be a child and they could just be playing with their toys one minute and then crying the next, or seem really, really happy, but they still could be grieving because their mind just can't handle that intense emotion. So they naturally take breaks. For adults, the grief is always present. For children, they're dependent, so that can sometimes magnify their grief. So besides grieving the one that they lost, they could also be thinking, what if the person taking care of me now dies? Then what do I do? Who do I live with? That sort of thing. So there are some differences between children grief and adult grief, and we do offer something to help with that. It's called Camp Glow.
Okay. So just before we get into Camp Glow, I've seen where sometimes with children grieving that parents will, or not, I wouldn't say parents, but just somebody thinking that they are doing the right thing for these little kids will just kind of say something that is not necessarily true. Like, for instance, Grandpa went up into heaven in an elevator. Is it best to be truthful with kids, or do these, he went up in an elevator, is that, to me, it's just like, kids, I mean, they take everything literally, and they will maintain that then into their adulthood. And so I can just see where somewhere along the line, their whole understanding now of what happens when people die is going to get shattered, and it's going to be kind of, hard, the fallacies that sometimes we think, this will be comforting to a child.
Right.
But really it's going to be devastating on the long run.
You are spot on. So you should always be honest with children about death and what happens. I think there's ways to do that tastefully. You don't have to go into all the detail, but we don't want to be lying to children either, because that causes further confusion and it could complicate their grief. So you don't want to say, like, Grandpa's going up in an elevator to heaven, or, Grandpa's just sleeping, or Grandpa just went on a journey, that sort of thing. Those things are confusing to kids, so they might be scared to go to sleep if they know that, Grandpa went to sleep and I don't see Grandpa anymore.
Mm-hmm. Or if they went on a journey, they just keep looking and waiting.
Yeah.
One of these days, Grandpa's going to be coming back he's going to come to see me again.
Exactly.
Yeah, okay, so you got a program that's called Camp Glow.
Yes.
So why don't you share a little bit about that, Camp Glow? What exactly is that, Camp Glow?
So I'm so excited to share with you about Camp Glow. It's an acronym for Giving Loved Ones Wings. That's what the GLOW stands for. It's a day that's set aside for children who are grieving, and it's a camp, and it's free and open to anyone, not just families of someone who's been on our services. It's for kids ages 6 to 14, And our Camp Glow in Platteville, it will be at the Platteville High School on Saturday, March 19th from 10 to 3. So what happens is the child, when they come to Camp Glow, they're going to get paired up with a buddy. And the buddy is an adult volunteer who has gone through special training to be able to help the children throughout the day with different activities and crafts that'll help them cope with their grief and learn some skills to help them grieve and express their grief, and so forth.
Well, it sounds like it's going to be, very beneficial then, for them to be able to do that. And so what was the date? March
19th.
19th. And here again, I know that we will have some information as far as, a phone number and possibly like, would there be like a
There's a website.
Website that we'll have that up on the screen here. So that if you want to get in contact with Lindsay and with Home Health United, that this would be a way to say, oh yes, this would be so good for some children that who are in grief. And so it's this 1-day camp. Then it'll be held at the Platteville High School.
Yes.
In Platteville, Wisconsin. And is it just people who live in Platteville that can go?
No, no, it's for anyone who's grieving.
Okay.
So this is our 4th year of having Camp Glows. We've held them in Baraboo, Wisconsin and Janesville, Wisconsin, and people from wherever can come. We do have a cap set on 12 children though, so if you know someone who's interested or who may benefit from this, the registration should probably be turned in sooner rather than later.
Yeah, so 12. So that's kind of the optimal number that you can minister or work with in that particular day. And I should just say, it sounds like you cover quite an area then as far as your work as spiritual and grief counselor.
Yeah. So the bereavement takes up a lot of my time, so I'm always making calls to people and checking in and visiting with patients. And this Camp Glow, it's like I said, it's going to be the first time we do that in Platteville, so we're excited to launch it there, and we hope that we have a really good turnout.
Yeah, and so they get there, and you say it's a 1 day, but it sounds like it's a pretty full day.
It's a very full day.
Yeah.
Yep.
And so walk us through this again. There's going to be some activities. So they're going to go there, and so there's going to be some, what would be some of these activities that would help a young person to develop some skills as far, like a child, to develop some skills as they're going through this time of grief?
Sure. So some of the activities we have, one is a scrapbooking activity, and another activity is journaling. So they can get their emotions out and get how they're feeling out on paper, whether that be through drawing and using stickers and different art material, or actually for the older kids, actually, forming words and writing about how they're feeling. We do a memory box. It's a little box, and they can decorate that, and then when they take it home, they fill it with little treasures of their loved one. So whenever they're feeling like they need to, connect with their loved one, they can open that box and take out little trinkets that remind them of their loved one, like, I don't know, a watch or a piece of paper or a note or something of that nature.
Oh, yeah. Well, it really sounds like it's going to be meaningful. And then what other and you have other activities planned that day as well?
We do. So for Camp Glow, there's also a session for adults. So while the children are connecting with other children who are grieving, which is huge because it's nice for children to know that they're not alone in their grief, that there are other kids like them, the adults who bring the children to the camp, so either a parent or a guardian, they'll have their own session where they can explore their own grief and help them learn tools to help their child when they go home.
Yeah, so it's helping the parents, but then also connecting to say that this is how we can work together on this. This is how I can, you look at a grieving parent who now is also ministering to, his or her children. And so it's almost like, I'm kind of operating like the wounded healer here. As I grieve, I'm also working to help heal my child's grief. And
right.
I imagine that it kind of goes the other way too, is that as a child is working through his or her grief, that that somehow this is, all of a sudden it's kind of like those little grace or God moments that a child will show that will sometimes help bring some healing for the parent, I would think.
Mm-hmm. And one thing we also like to say is that children learn how to grieve from their adults in their lives. So as the adults are going through this session, learning how to express their grief and that sort of thing, they may see that their children pick up on that and they start to express their grief as well.
Yeah, okay. And so you've had some of these in other communities, and do you continue to have them? And like you mentioned, like Baraboo, Wisconsin. So
Right.
have you gone back there now? Is it like an annual, try to making this an annual event then?
It is an annual event.
Okay.
Yep, it is.
I see. So
It
you have
is.
so you try to make this like Platteville's going to have their first one, and then you will do this again then hopefully the year following.
Exactly.
And maybe there'll be a time when maybe you'll need to do it more than once a year.
That would be wonderful if we found the need for that. Yeah.
You're going to be a pretty busy gal once all of this gets started, but but that's how it starts, and then it grows and it builds from there. Well, I'll tell you what, Lindsay, I am very impressed with you and what you're doing with Home Health United, and just the services that are provided for people and care. It's just it can be such a sad, sorrowful, lonely time when you're going through that journey of grief. But to know that there are people out there who actually care and who love and who are really are providing some services that really make a difference to help us to take a step in the right direction, a step toward healing, and a step toward hope. And you mentioned GLOW. I like the word GLOW, but that's an acronym for
Giving loved ones wings.
giving loved ones wings. Well, I do like that. And so, so in the little time that we have, is there anything else that you'd want to share about the grief care and the grief program?
Well, if anyone has any questions about grief or about any of the services Home Health United provides, they can always call us. We can also set up informational visits. We have very knowledgeable staff who can help people walk through, complicated health care questions that they may have.
Yeah, so thank you so much, Lindsay. Lindsay Geyer, who is the spiritual and grief counselor for Home Health United. We just want to thank you so much for being on our program today.
Thank you.
And this has been very informative. And here again, it is just such a blessing to know that there are such wonderful services that are provided for us in our communities so that we don't have to go it alone. Yeah, so again, thank you, and God bless you for joining us this day as well.